Welcome to Proven Sustainable Conversations, a collection of thought-provoking talks with Indigenous and Maroon people and their supporters to realize and challenge our conscious and unconscious colonized thinking and behaviors.
I'm going to read a quick excerpt from my book, I Love Salmon and Lampreys, that came out this March, which is, I admire how salmon and lampreys go from the river into the unknown ocean. They grow up in the ocean and they come back to the home, to the same stream they were born to have their kids. And then learning from the endurance of the salmon and lampreys, I myself grew up and began to explore a new world away from my home. I went to college to learn about dams and how to protect salmon in the future. I became an engineer and a scientist, which basically means I do fancy math and science to understand water, nature, people, animals, and buildings. And, like the salmon and lampreys, I made my way home to the Klamath River in Northern California, where now I get to take care of fish for people in the future, like my ancestors have done for me in the past.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Welcome, Brook and Dylan. Brook Thompson, Dylan Aubrey. You're here with myself, K2 Oladawa, and Kelsey Green with Proven Sustainable. And we're here to have a conversation about your lives and the work that you do and the importance of that work. Before I get into the deep questioning, I don't know how deep it's going to be, but before I get into the questioning, would you please introduce yourselves and your heritage so that we can all be clear about who we're speaking with? And Brook, will you start?
Sure. So, Ayakwi Nicknow Brook, Watek Mewok Mewok, Pudaglawe, Pichaglawe, Eureka Ock, Ne Pichuas Iwok Archie Thompson. So, my name's Brook Thompson. I'm from the Watek village on the Klamath River, and I'm from the Yurok and Kotuk tribes of Northern California, and the granddaughter of Archie Thompson. Rest in peace. But I am a civil environmental engineer, artist in multimedia work, author, as you saw with my children's book, as well as, oh gosh, I feel like I do a few things, but yeah, author, artist, engineer, and PhD student full-time. That's a big thing, where I'm a PhD student at UC Santa Cruz studying salmon, traditional ecological knowledge, and restoration in the state of California.
All right. Thank you. And Dylan Aubrey?
Kui Nek Now, Dylan Aubrey, Nepur Yurok. My name is Dylan Aubrey. I'm a Yurok tribal member. I have a podcast called Drum Circle News. I'm also a full-time MBA student. I do public outreach for the Yurok Fisheries department. And I just started a fellowship with Home for Humanity, One Home Journey, where I'll be speaking with Indigenous elders from around the world.
And you say you just began that, Dylan?
Yes, sir.
What have you learned as a result of those conversations that you've had that relate to your identity and your heritage and your growing up as Yurok?
Well, there's only been 3 conversations under the One Home Journey so far, which was the first one being with Four Arrows, and whom we've made our connection through. And I met Four Arrows through Home for Humanity. So I want to give a shout out to Four Arrows, who I revere. And I want to give a shout out to Rama and Alexander over at the One Home Journey. Four Arrows was a really interesting conversation with this book, The Kinship Worldview, where we talk about the indigenous concepts. And as an academic who's constantly writing papers in the MBA world about how to decolonize the approach to business, his books were great resources for me. Not only his books, but his articles and studies. So there's a lot out there. I recommend anyone interested in an indigenous worldview to go look into Four Arrows. And then there was Maui. He was a Moriori from the Chatham Islands. It's an incredible story. The British anthropologists were saying that they're extinct, so they've been fighting for their recognition post-genocide on the Chatham Islands. It's an incredible story. I recommend checking it out. They lived in 800 years of peace and almost went extinct from genocide because they upheld their Nanaku peace law and decided not to fight back. And so it's really an incredible story. And I recently talked with, it's not released yet, with Kedar Gandhari, who is an indigenous person from India. He's a Gandharva, and their music is said to be so beautiful that when they start playing, the gods stop fighting. And it's really an amazing story. We talk about the caste system happening in Nepal. The recent revolution that just happened, the capital got burned down, and there's a interim government in Nepal at the moment. That conversation will be released soon, but likely when this is released, that'll be released. So go check it out.
All right. It sounds like you have a worldwide reach, and we're going to get into some of that. But before we do, Brook, your book, your beautiful book, your beautiful children's book, speaks to your connection to the ocean and to the Klamath River and to Northern California. Can you tell us some more about yourself in that relationship, in those relationships, the ocean and river and land?
Yeah, I would love to. So, I mean, first off, I feel like I can't get really away from the water with my name being Brook, as in like a small stream. But also the fact I grew up on the Yurok Reservation, right at the mouth of the Klamath River in Northern California. So where the river meets the ocean, and the fact I'm from the Yurok and Karuk tribes, which their literal translations is the up and down river people. So everything I do is centered in the river and ocean. And it's I guess connected with that. It's kind of funny because one of the reasons I actually was able to go to Stanford for my master's in environmental engineering with a focus on water resource and hydrology was because I was at a business meeting in an engineering firm in California, because I used to work as an internship in different water engineering firms. And I was talking to someone at the firm, and I was like, yeah, my river is the Klamath River, in the sense that like how I'd refer to my mother is like so-and-so, or my grandfather's this person. And the person at the engineering firm said they've never heard anyone refer to a river like that before. And that opened up something for them, because for them, right, water isn't necessarily this relational connection. It's this thing you build around. It's this thing you make money from. It's this engineering tool. And that got him so excited that he introduced me to one of the professors at Stanford, Professor Freiberg, who I was able to talk with, and I really think helped my chances at Stanford, having that connection of this person who was able to see this connection to water through something I didn't even think of, because it's so innate that the river is not just, right, a resource. It's the Klamath River to me is my relative. It's, my ancestor, and it's also my future. And so for me, having that connection to the water and being able to see it change over time, I always say, like, right, I'm getting a PhD at UC Santa Cruz and have these engineering water degrees. But if I could, I would really, give out these PhDs to all these relatives and people in the tribe that live on the river and have fished every single day, because they understand that water so in depth and so well on exactly how the bottom of the river is when the tides come in and out and where the fish like to go, that no one who studies the river in a classroom will ever get to the level of expertise it takes to have a lifetime on the river. So I always just like to bring that up, that, I'm trying to get these degrees to have these letters at the end of my name that make this Western world listen to me. But at the end of the day, I really want to uplift the voices of those who didn't have the opportunity or who don't want to go to formal Western education who live by the teachings of the river, and their knowledge is just, if not more valid than what I've learned in the Western education system, and yet they're not being listened to. So for me, living on the river, it's my home. It's my highway going to villages or different places or even my family's houses you can only get to by boat. When I was younger, it's also my grocery store because that's where we get a lot of our food that wasn't just like canned or like food or commodities from the government. So the river is really everything. And it's kind of where I think back to like where I center myself in all my work.
Wow. When we speak about proven sustainable, that's what we're speaking to. We're talking about the relational nature of our humanness to all our relations, to all of life on the planet. And getting that perspective across to people who are coming from academic and governmental and systemic, coming from those perspectives is a challenge. And I salute you for the work you're doing. Dylan, where did you grow up? Did you grow up on res?
I personally didn't grow up on the reservation, and I'm going to jump into that. I do want to take one second to note that I really appreciate the studies that Brook is doing because the Western world, they utilize language as a hierarchical tool where they create these Latin terms in the science world, and they're gatekeeping communities that hold themselves above others just because they have this language they created around a world, an idea, and indigenous ways of knowing, our epistemologies, our approach, our deep understanding is just as valid, if not more, in many cases. And we need people like Brook to go and learn this indigenous, this Western language, and then be able to bridge that gap so we can start moving forward. And I think that's really important. For me,
You're a communicator. You just demonstrated that. How do you deal with that very thing that you just spoke to? How do you deal with that as a communicator? And then how did your coming to maturity, how has your coming to maturity progressed to give you this worldview, this perspective?
that's a very interesting question. That since you tied in maturity, when I was younger, I did know that I had a skill of communicating, and I went through every little kid's dream growing up in these bad neighborhoods. Like I wanted to be a rapper. I think a lot of people could relate to that. Just making music and with your buddies, and you can freestyle because I know how to put all these different words together. But then as I was going through the motions of taking it seriously, I realized that it just wasn't as deep as I was thinking it was going to be. Once you kind of get to the other side of the veil, you kind of see how hollow everything is. And I just had a deeper calling and passion to be able to actually make an impact.
Okay. I had a deeper calling to make an impact. Expand on that for me. Coming out of rap, the hard neighborhoods, expand on that for me. I'm dealing with those communities now. Tell me, how did you come out of that? And the frame of reference that you have gone back to, your heritage frame of reference that you've gone back to. How did you go from one to the other?
Well, there, unfortunately, just because of loss of culture, not just for myself, but in general, a lot of Native Americans don't reconnect to their deeper cultural roots until they've gone through something and they've hit rock bottom. Like once you've like really, like, there's nothing left but to just face yourself because everything else is kind of just, your whole world is crumbled.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's when people finally look to culture, and then they realize that that connection is what they've really been missing the whole time. And at least definitely for me, that's what's happened, and that's what I've recognized with other people who've gone through that reconnection journey, connecting with your ancestors, connecting with your ceremony, connecting with a community that understands you for who you are and the way that you think, and you don't have to pretend or put on this mask or code switch or whatever, however you want to refer to it, and you can just truly embrace who you are. And that's the sort of impact that I want to make is that re-indigenization movement.
Okay. Just a step backward into the conversation that we had before we went live. Then what's around your neck? Because we don't see that every day. What is that?
So this was a gift from my wife during our wedding ceremony. She's Mexica, which is the southern tribes in Mexico. And part of the ceremony is that I gift her obsidian and she gives me jade, which is the rocks right here. And just to make it a little bit of a deeper connection to me, this is a coyote jaw, and my native name is Saget, and in the Yurok language that means coyote. So I am coyote.
Thank you. Thank you, Coyote. Um, Kelsey?
Yeah, I'll ask this to Dylan and then extend it on to Brook as well. You were just speaking about reconnecting to culture and then we segued briefly to your wedding ceremony and with your wife. So do you want to speak to what are some of the most prominent connections that nourish you and inspire you right now? And I know I want to acknowledge, again, I want to pose this to both of you, and I acknowledge Brooke was speaking about this even with the river. So thinking of that indigenous worldview and framing that this can go beyond what Western dominant worldview often affiliates, even just with a significant other or individual. But would love to hear your input on that.
I first want to recognize that my reconnection journey is a lot easier than what the average reconnecting person will go through. My father is deeply connected to the Yurok community. His name is Edward Aubrey. He's past Northern Council member, currently running for chairman. Grew up on the reservation. Our family goes back until they stopped collecting our names, all the way back to Wichipec Jones, and even before that. But that was just the first name that was collected, and so being able to come back to the res and just have that connection to family and culture has been more of a familial reconnection journey, which is not the same what most people will go through. Most people trying to reconnect, I always like to state it like this: trying to rejoin into a Native community, reconnect to a Native community is like trying to become a part of a secret society. It's very hard. It's more than just getting your name on the roll because you prove lineal descendancy. Like, you really got to know the communities, know the leaders, know the elders, and they have to accept you as well. And so it's just kind of this push and pull of, like, showing who you are, improving yourself, showing yourself worthy to learn this kind of deeper knowledge that's protected for a really strong reason. It's been stolen from us, and natives used to get killed. My dad would tell stories of having to go under bridges and hide just to be able to dance. There's three things I would say. that really ground me. Everybody's journey is personal. So there's three, I think, universal things for the reconnecting native is the first thing is always find yourself first. Always focus on love and trust in the creator.
Brooke, do you want to add in how that relates to you or expand on your connections?
Yeah. No, the reconnection conversation is something I'm also very passionate about, and it's I guess it's interesting to have the perspective on the other side, and also just to clarify some things Dylan said really quick when he mentions his father dancing. So a lot of our ceremonies revolve around like traditional dances for balancing the world that were outlawed for up until was it Native Americans got freedom of religion in 1976. And when I say like, you know, that's when we got, that's not necessarily when it was accepted. I mean, some would argue it's still not fully accepted, but that's when it was re-legalized in the Western world. So uh, just that reference to prosecution about that. But for me, I feel really strongly about reconnection, especially just pointing out that I think not only my communities, but like a lot of Indigenous communities in the US could do a lot more for Afro-Indigenous folks who want to reconnect, because I've seen my own family members and friends try to reconnect to their tribes and have a much more difficult time than someone who, you know, is mixed with like being part white or something. And just recognizing our own internal biases, even as Indigenous peoples, to different groups, and understanding that, you know, we're stronger together, and that if we spend time with like petty infighting, sometimes, you know, when we fight each other, someone else is winning. And I understand also like the hesitation to let people in because, you know, not everyone in the tribe has done their own healing yet. And there's a lot of pain and, you know, feelings of being scared from having that information stolen again from, you know, all these times where we had such good faith and people took advantage of that. So for anyone who's trying to reconnect to the tribes, I always say that's, you know, it's kind of like cracking an egg. It's really hard to get in at first, and people can be like very standoffish. And I swear natives have some of the meanest mugs sometimes. But once you get past that, you'll find like such friendly people who like some of the people who I've seen have the meanest faces to strangers end up like having the biggest hearts and smiling and like making the funniest jokes. But, you know, they have that hard shell up from so many years, and not only in their lifetime, but that passed down trauma of being taken advantage of. And so I think it's just something that we all need to collectively heal from. And as someone with a mother who's non-native, it's also been interesting for me because despite her not being native, I actually only recently found out she has a minor in Native American studies, and she specifically has a thesis on how to best teach native high schoolers who are struggling in school. And so to know that like if you're mixed or you have mixed kids, that even if you're not from that background, you can still assist in that process and be supportive of it, because there's a lot of parents who aren't. And I think some people even experience that from their parents who are from a certain Indigenous background, who maybe are like hesitant to teach language or like pushing back because they've seen that prosecution. And understanding that, you know, we can each do our part no matter what your background is. If you're already in the tribe and like the in circle or grew up there, if you're coming in, if you're someone who has mixed kids, that everyone can play a role in, you know, building this more trusting and accepting path forward, and understanding everyone will make mistakes and we're going to heal together, because, you know, we're so much more, for me, I think the tribe is just brought back even more by having all these people who want to be involved in making those reconnections. And I am just so excited for the future, because I see more and more people wanting to come back, and I really hope I can contribute to making a place for them.
Beautiful. K2, to continue.
Yes. Both of you, what I hear is you're speaking to what it means to be a human being. Dylan, your reference to self-knowledge, love, and the Creator clearly speak to what it means to be a human being. That perspective isn't one that is valued or seen from a Western systemic perspective. What does it take for you to engage that Western worldview, understanding that in the world that we live in, it is the dominant view? From an African perspective, African and African American perspective, we understand that we are in a constant state of war, and that how we wage that and how we understand ourselves in it determines the state of our humanity. I'm just wondering, from your perspective, especially as a communicator, how do you understand that engagement with the Western worldview?
There are many excellent Black authors who have done some incredible work talking about this. There's a book called Black Skin, White Face, and there's a quote in there that says, Black consciousness must be reclaimed outside of white structures. And, Vine Deloria, who's a Native American author, has done some work, and similarly, where he says that, and I'm paraphrasing, but Western systems, including, capitalism, socialism, Christianity, they all fail because they see themselves as alienated from nature. And so, working in Western-centered, in a Western-centered world is very hard because it's a constant deconstruction. You have to go and meet them where they are. Because where we are spiritually and mentally, cognitively is in a completely different place. It's somewhere that most people in the Western world cannot reach. And so it can be very exhausting, especially the deeper you go in your journey, the harder it is to be able to meet someone where they are. And it's just being patient and understanding and trying to be a guiding force without overreaching and allowing that ego to permeate into yourself, which is another difficult thing to do.
So does that mean, am I hearing that you have to be ever conscious of depleting your own resources, your own spiritual resources, your own sense of identity in your communication with the Western mindset?
Definitely. And also having that understanding that they don't understand where you're coming from and where your center is. While I care deeply for the land, where Brooke said that the river is her relative, it's not just something she's saying. Like, wholeheartedly, the land where we come from is a part of us. And it's not, as Vine Deloria would put it, a stage in which life happens upon. And our connection to our ancestors and the Creator is just as deep. And that's something that is also a bridge that needs to be gapped, or a gap. You know what I'm trying to say here.
A gap that needs to be bridged.
There we go. We need the other side to hit it. That's why I was coming from this way. We needed to make that connection.
Speaking of that bridge, Brooke, do you want to weigh in on this as well?
Yeah, I just wanted to add what was being said around, this idea of language in the Western world. As someone who does restoration work, I one of the things I have sensed is that it's almost impossible to do the type of restoration I really care about, almost using the English language, as Dylan brought up before, like the fact we have to use these Latin terminologies and the Linnaeus system that created the categorization. Even though indigenous peoples have very similar categorization in Europe, they made a specific decision not to use any indigenous words, even for plants and animals that weren't in Europe whatsoever, when colonizing the world and, you know, taking these plants and animals. And for me, I see that in my own work, because when I talk about land, when I talk about plants, when I talk about animals, and when I talk about water, right, like I said with that engineer I was talking to previously, we are saying these same words, but they don't have the same meaning. So when I talk about like redwood trees, I'm talking about them as a relation. I'm talking about them, Ketu, you talked about like personhood. I'm talking them as having personhood. When others are talking about their value as related to carbon, as related to a dollar value, as related to statistical measures, and seeing, it's kind of that saying, like missing the forest for the trees. Like people are not seeing, or the Western world, when I have conversations around these forests or these areas, are talking about these theoretical numbers in their translation into capital, not as relatives, not as people, not as these beings, these relatives that I also want to see succeed, because I know when they succeed, I succeed. And also what Dylan was talking about with like understanding that people don't understand. And I really think that's not only unfortunate, but a systematic choice that was made, because, equity is not equality. And I've seen that even when I used to work on the U.S. Senate Committee on Indian Affairs as an intern in Washington, D.C. under the first Trump administration. And when you get so many minutes as a tribal chairman, which is kind of like our equivalent of like a president in the tribe, to talk about an issue, so many people in DC, despite American Indian law being a basis of American law in general, do not have the first understanding of it. And so everyone's given 5 minutes of these different groups, like say a big corporation versus a tribe, and the big corporation, the whole legal system is built around them, they get that full 5 minutes to talk. But if a tribe has to spend the first 3 minutes explaining the basics of Native American law and sovereignty, you only get 2 minutes of real content you're speaking to these groups, or even within the Supreme Court. And so it's that idea that not only like are we being misunderstood, but it feels like a lot of that misunderstanding has historically been purposeful, and that we had to play catch up now, and that, the English language only has so much context and understanding to express the things that are true in our culture and understanding of the world that do not translate one-to-one. And when you only know one language like English, it's really hard to get that in-depth understanding if people haven't experienced that firsthand. And I see that with my own communication, very difficult to come across on a daily basis. And I'm looking forward to Dylan and looking at his leadership on how to best address that. But it is not a easy task.
Before we shift back over to Dylan and hear more of his input on this, is there a word, name, calling within the Yurok language or indigenous language that you could speak to kind of exemplify some of what you're talking about?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think a concept that speaks to me, and just for context, my grandfather Iwok, which means like rest in peace, Brook Thompson, was the last native Yurok speaker. So he was the last person alive who grew up with Yurok as his first language. And he grew up during the boarding school era, where kids were forcefully taken from their homes and forced to forget their languages and learn English. But for me, it's a concept that in Yurok, a lot of what we speak about are active verbs. versus like passive nouns. And so like, talking about, a piece of paper in like a Yurok translation, I wouldn't say like this is a piece of paper. I'd say it's being a piece of paper. And so I think that concept of like this active being and that everything's like kind of this active participant. In addition to the fact that we have even more terminology for past and future tense and present tense than the English language does. And I think that really exemplifies like ways of thinking long term. Because again, if we're thinking about like redwood trees live for hundreds of years. And if we're thinking about sustainability, we should have, multi-generation mindsets for that, for success. And yet when I've worked in policy and legislation, everything's around term limits, which is 2 to 6 years. And so if we're referring to everything around how we're organizing ourselves and our like quote unquote resources, we're never going to cut it for long-term sustainability if we're only thinking in re-election cycles. And we need to be thinking about, in my opinion, multi-generational legislation that's accounting for hundreds of years and our future ancestor, or, being a future ancestor, and how, if previously those in power in the, early, like mid 1850s or like 18, whatnot, we're considering how their effects on resources were going to affect us today in 2025, we'd be in a much different position than if they were just thinking about the next like 5-10 years.
Definitely.
The conundrum that you speak to, Brooke, about language and communicating effectively with people who do not have the sense, the sensational aspects of being to communicate with you. If they're talking policy and law and governance, how do you communicate with people who cannot hear? And the question is or should that be the focus, or should the focus be, or could the focus be communication with people who live in their bodies from a feeling perspective, not just an emotional perspective from which the West comes, but from a feeling perspective? Should the communication be with those people? And I'm asking you this as a scientist, quote unquote. From an African perspective, scientist existed long before Western folk even understood what that word meant, because there was a on relationship with with nature and with creation. That's the science. From my perspective, that's the science. The science is not the words and the gobbledygook language that has been created to maintain a certain group of people's control over the environment and other people.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'll give a quick response and then I want to pass it to Dylan to add to that. So I'm really excited to hear his comments and thoughts. And for me, one, you mentioned about like trying to communicate to people who have a hard time hearing or understanding. And for me, I feel like my energy is best spent talking to people who are willing to listen. So I do not want to spend my time, energy, and life trying to convince those who have already been committed to mishearing me and trying to convince them otherwise. I would rather spend my time and passion talking to people who are open to listening and want to understand and are committed to having that reciprocal relationship. Because for me, I think about this almost in terms of alcoholism, unfortunately, where, I've had some alcoholic people in my life, and have spent a lot of time and energy wanting to, get them help and spend all this time to try to figure out the best thing I can do for them because I really want the best for them. And it's hard to see that. And it's really hard to want to make all these changes on their behalf. But at the end of the day, I also cannot help someone who doesn't want to help themselves. They have to make that decision internally first that they want help. And then I'm happy to be there. I'll be there right that second and we can work towards something. But if kind of like in that communication sense, if someone's already determined to misunderstand me and is maybe having these conversations to seem on the outside that, they're able to like have these diverse conversations, but aren't actually wanting to have real dialogue because you can talk without talking, if that makes sense. You can say words back and forth at each other without actually, getting anywhere. And for me, that is just not a good use of my time. And I know there's so many people who are excited to have these conversations. And I think that's how we go forward with this. And, also, just bring this up with academia too. I used to hold a lot of context in my heart about, like doing this code switching thing and making sure I use this like academic languages when writing papers, when talking to people. And I went to this conference. It's one of my favorite conferences. It's called NCORE, the National Conversation on Race and Ethnicity in Higher Education. And I went to a professor there who talked about how when we, especially in elementary school, when we correct kids for using language as like, too resi, too, ghetto, to what else, slang in our, what we use at home and what we use with like our cousins, then we're sounding inherently like quote unquote dumb. And this happens in white culture too, in the South, that like Southern draws and accents sound inherently like uneducated, and that shouldn't be a thing. And so I've actually made it a point to use more slang and more just like casual language when doing my science communication, when writing papers, when having these conferences, because I want to try to disrupt that conversation and this narrative that you have to use these like fancy Latin words and like large vocabulary in order to be intelligent. Because, just because I'm coming from a native household where we use like in it and like ain't and like, all these terms that I communicate with my family with doesn't mean we're non-educated. And I want to disrupt that narrative in the conversations I have as well. So that's just like a little side point there. But yeah, I want to pass over to Dylan.
I'll say that Brooke really hit it really on the nose. And you don't want to give space to someone who isn't really trying to listen. A lot of times these systems are structured for them and for them to win. It's not really about getting to a place of understanding or knowing or truth. What I will add to that, though, is because you brought up alcoholism, I think it's important to understand that trauma, generational trauma, happens in every community, not just in Native communities. But the generational trauma that hits Western communities, particularly, European American communities, is a lot different than what hits Native communities, but they do still have it. You have to think about the mental gymnastics it takes to get to a place to treat a human as subhuman. You have to get to a place of a godlike complex to be able to do these atrocious things. A lot of the nastiest parts of slavery is what we don't talk about, where they're eating slaves and they have to send the slaves to other slaves to then skin them and use them as throw pillows and cook them in meals. And they used to eat mummies. This it's not everyone. And so there are many large communities in the European American communities who have done the work, and they've made it so much further past because they didn't participate in that style. But there are a lot of communities who come directly from lineages that did have that in their family. And so that's going to take them a long time to be able to deconstruct that trauma. And that won't happen until they face it. And those specific communities, they don't want to face it because you have to look at yourself, that dark night inside of you. And when it's so scary, it's really hard to do. it's really hard to do.
Brooke brought up being a disruptor or disrupting the conversation and the expectations of the Western society and its oppressive policies, laws, and the rest. As a communicator, how are you a disruptor?
Is that question addressed to me? Okay. As a communicator, I'm definitely a disruptor because I'm bringing that dark night forward. And that is difficult to do personally because it opens you up to just a lot of different things. So,
Is there in your familial lineage, are there healers? Because in your conversation, you're sounding like a healer.
the Yuroks used to have sucking doctors, but that knowledge has been lost. Unfortunately, our last sucking doctor passed away a long time ago.
Now, you said sucking doctor? Is that
Mhm.
right? Can you explain that?
Without going too deep into like Yurok personal spiritual knowledge, I'll just generically put it and say that it's more of like a healer who will cleanse negative energy out of your body and you help you remove that and heal you. And so that last person who's known to have that knowledge and documented to have that knowledge passed away a long time ago, unfortunately, just because of the boarding schools and different forms of colonization and the ethnic cleansings that have happened within our communities. It was just not safe to be able to pass that knowledge down.
Mm.
And so inherently, a lot of native people, a lot of Yurok people do have, healing capabilities within their spirit. And I would love to see us get back to a place where we can recapture that.
That work is that work going on within the community, not cross communally, but within the community? Is that healing being done? And I ask you that, Dylan, but also Brooke.
Brooke is definitely a great person to ask that question to because she's been up and down the villages talking with so many elders about that very conversation. From what I've seen, there's been a big interest in the youth and wanting to come forward and learn more. But I'll pass that one to Brooke.
Yeah, I guess just quickly, one like topics about like that healing, I like to leave specifically to like our what we call like dance families in the tribe. So those who actively run these ceremonies for healing of, and again, in the tribe, one of the general things is that we're not only healing, like we don't have just doctors that heal each other as people. We as spiritual beings work to heal the earth and create balance in the world. So it's not only about healing us, it's about healing the earth, and creating balance is a large part of our culture. And yeah, so I would like to kind of like leave that question up for dance families to talk about. But I will say the connection to like sustainability is, in order to do these ceremonies and practice them successfully, we have to have access to our lands and our indigenous areas. We have to have access to do cultural burning. Like our sense of healing and spirituality is so connected with the landscape that if we don't have this access to be able to exercise our sovereignty in the way that we conduct ourselves through cultural burnings, through gathering, through harvesting, that's one of the best ways to support, in my opinion, the future of like these ceremonies and healing. But I also just want to touch on something that Dylan said as well with the idea, and he connected this to slavery, of like having to do mental gymnastics, almost see yourself as a god to do inhuman things. And that really resonated with me in the sense of the environment. Like, right. And I grew up as a Methodist, and a lot of right things in the Bible talk about inherently how God put everything on the earth for us to use and consume. And I think that's honestly translated a bit into restoration work and how, the general public has seen the environment, because have, seen such inhumane things done to plants, animals, and right, we, as you say, like our non-two-legged relatives. And I almost think that mindset's almost like that, like as we as humans, or we as like, the human race are gods, and that plants, animals, and nature should come to us, and we should not think of their relations. We should just think of how they can benefit us and do these horrible things to them. And so for me, like that just really resonated with like how I'm like how there's that difference there, that I feel like you can only like clear cut a eroded forest and all these trees who have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years, who right help create this specific ecosystem with like the fog and the complex interactions that is able to make somewhere like California thrive, and not, think about it that deeply and just see it as a paycheck. And yeah, I just wanted to point that out because that really, really hit home with me, and just the understanding that, when the environment's hurt, we hurt as Indigenous peoples. And I think we all hurt, as residents of the earth, because we have this complex relationship. And I think it's just easier to see as like someone who's Indigenous, when the water quality does bad, we do bad as people. And I'm sure you could see the same in places like Flint, Michigan, where it's like the basis of our health and well-being is based on the health of the land and the water. And when that's doing poorly, all these other connections on health and well-being also do poorly. And one last thing that Dylan mentioned too is like, yeah, this idea of like care and healing. And I also want to put out that like there's this idea of like community healing too, right? It's like not only healing as me as a person, like for me to do well, my community needs to do well too. Cause we all support each other and we're all there for each other. Like if my dad's in pain and hurting, it hurts me too. And then if I'm sick and my dad's sick, then there's no one to take care of like me, or if I'm doing poorly, I can't take care of him. So I think a lot of, especially like American culture has been so focused on individualism that like it would be really nice to get back to this community collective mindset where we can take care of one another and know that when you're taking care of your neighbor, you're taking care of yourself, because we're all here and need each other to not only survive but thrive. And I would love one day to get out of this like kind of survival mindset and get into like a thriving mindset. And with that, for me also comes like this idea of rest. And after my ancestors have had to work so hard for so long, it's such a privilege to be able to take a break. And it's funny because I have such a hard time relaxing or taking breaks. It's way harder for me to like try to be like, okay, I'm gonna sit down and watch a TV show than it is for me to be like, oh, okay, I'll just crank out another essay or like do research on this subject I care about, and just bring up the importance of rest when it comes to healing as well.
Rest, I've been told, is the most revolutionary thing that you can do. Because if you don't rest, you burn out.
Yeah, there's that book, Rest is Resistance.
Yes.
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 And then I was going to say, with the comment you made, get to with Dylan too, from my perspective, Dylan just being in these narratives and being able to have a platform to speak is revolutionary in itself and disrupting, because people like him with like Indigenous background have so often been kept out of the main narrative. And with that rest too, I always say like being born in a country that tried to exterminate you through genocide and through slavery and all these things, taking care of yourself for me is disruption, because in a world that wants you to work yourself to death and wanted like someone like me to be exterminated, I think thriving, living a healthy life, and being able to relax is disrupting in itself, because that's not what a lot of people in the past have ever wanted for me, and that would be upsetting to them. So
Yes, well, that's a way to push back against the erasure narrative. It's definitely a way to push back. Um, let's talk about history and salmon. You've spoken to relationships between the individual work that you're doing, that both of you are doing, and the forces of capitalism and Western mindset that you encounter and deal with on a ongoing basis. Brooke, you just spoke to some of the historical understanding of where you have been as a people, not just as an individual. Ubuntu. I am because we are because I am. Um, that understanding, moving from that understanding to the relationship with the salmon, which are part of your family. What work has been done on the Klamath River to reclaim that river for the salmon to run?
yeah, I can start with that, and then Dylan, you want to add. I also just want to add that I love hearing the term Ubuntu. I was on a study abroad program called Semester at Sea, and that that's a term we always said while traveling to different countries, is that interconnectedness and that relationship and that reciprocity. I just want to point that out, but I love that term. But so thank you. But yeah, some of the work the tribe has been doing is, and maybe I'll let Dylan speak more to like the physical work that's been done recently, but the tribe has, and the tribes in general, not just the Yurok, has done a lot of work in pushing for the removal of 4 dams on the Klamath River this last year, in a 24-year struggle that started much before then, but was really starting to come to fruition with the 2002 fish kill that I witnessed firsthand, where around 60,000 salmon died just over a few days on the Klamath River in September of 2002, and how that has continued to impact the tribe, and that nothing in our oral history has ever told of a tragedy of that scale, and how many people, and not only tribes, but the coordination between tribes, conservation organizations, nonprofits, and just local people who care about fish, have come together to have 4 of the 6 dams on the Klamath River removed. And these dams were impacting water quality. They were promoting this toxic blue-green algae that created these skin rashes, and were hurting like people who are interacting with the water a lot, like our tribes. And were increasing parasite risk that was hurting the salmon and increasing deaths, as well as disrupting natural flow patterns and like soil. So a lot of people kind of miss the fact that not only do we have water cycles, we have soil cycles and nutrient cycles from all the sediment that's trapped behind the dams as well, that's supposed to come downriver and help feed the rest of the ecosystem. And the salmon couldn't get above the dam. So over 400 river miles of fish habitat were cut off by the dams that were built between the early 1900s and 1960s. And so this removal has been the largest dam removal project in the world, and has really exemplified to me why we need Indigenous leadership when it comes to the future of climate change and sustainability. Because many groups said that, especially because I was 7 years old when the fish kill had happened, but to the adults at the time who were pushing this, that this was never going to happen, that this was a foolish thing to ask for. And right, despite that, we have persisted as people, and kids who never saw the fish kill firsthand have spent their entire lives protesting and organizing to see the removal of these dams finally happen. And it is not only the removal of the dams, but it's the restoration work on the streams and waterways that connect it. So this has been like a super huge positive in my life, and I'm just so excited that I've lived to see it, because a lot of people have fought for this who have not had the privilege to live long enough to see it happen. So before I pass it off, I just want to recognize everyone who, contributed to the movement, because movements aren't just, at least to me, the people on the front lines, but it's those at home feeding the people at the rallies, and the people going to meetings, the ones who are working an extra job to send their family member to travel to these hearings, the ones who are making sure there's enough food at home to eat so we have the physical ability to do this. And I feel like a lot of them don't get enough recognition for their impact in this work it takes to remove a dam. But yeah, passing it over to you, Dylan, if you want to talk especially more on the specifics the tribe has been doing.
Yeah, I would love to take off from where you left it, which is amazing. I appreciate you for laying out that deep history on how we got to where we are today. And where we are today is we are leading the way in Indigenous-led restoration. The Yuroks are specifically, as far as the largest projects and sheer capacity of our Indigenous organizations. We have a fisheries department that has multiple programs, including the Design and Technical Services program that has 70 employees that include, biologists, ecologists. We're doing riparian revegetation. We're doing in-channel excavation. We're doing channel remodeling. We have the Yurok Construction Corporation, where we have operators and engineers. And we have Condor Aviation, where we have a Cessna Caravan outfitted with a TK8 sensor, where we're collecting LiDAR data and thermal imagery. And so we can really, just from design to implementation to completion, really see a project all the way through. And that's Yurok-led. Karuks have also a team of biologists that are doing really great. You can go to their website and get live water quality data. And then, the Hoopas, they're doing revegetation as well, and they have their own operators that come and work with us. And we have so many projects going on right now in many different watersheds and tributaries that feed to Klamath. So we have the Post Dam Removal River Restoration. We have the Scott River Restoration. We have the Trinity River Restoration. The Prairie Creek project, which is coming to a head this year, actually changed state law. Am I breaking up? Did you?
Yeah, I heard you.
Okay, so the Prairie Creek Restoration Project actually changed law, where tribes can now engage in government-to-government contracts and be able to have those restoration projects. Because before, there wasn't a box for us to check, and so we didn't qualify, even though we were sovereign nations. And so that project changed state law, and so now we can have these government-to-government relationships where we work alongside, state and federal projects and do this Indigenous-led restoration. So it's amazing. In the Scott River, we have the mine tailings, where during the gold rush, they had dredged the Trinity River and then pushed it up all the way to the side to a small side channel with just huge gravel mountains all along the river, pushing the water subsurface. Right now, we're implementing hyperrear control structures that are pushing the water above surface, and it's never been done in that context before. So not only are we doing Indigenous-led restoration, but we're also doing revolutionary style, just super, what's the word I'm looking for? Inventive, or you know what I'm trying to say here. Innovative. There we go. Yeah, innovative. And so, yeah, there's so much to get in there. There's a lot of projects, and I could really probably go all day.
Kelsey, gonna bring you back in after this question, because I just want to follow up on what you're saying. Dylan, given all of the good work that the tribes are doing, there's still more work to be done on the Klamath and dam removal, correct?
Yes.
Dams that have to be removed. What is the state of the recovery at this point? How much? How would you term the recovery that has happened thus far?
Amazing. And I implore anyone who's interested in following the restoration, just going and following Yurok on Facebook, the Yurok tribe on Facebook, and there's always putting out articles, always putting out photos of the different restoration projects going on to keep the public involved in what's happening. But we've seen multiple tributary projects to completion, and um, this is going to be the first winter where the water's going to run through after a lot of the projects that we completed over the summer. And so the way that Yuroks and indigenous people do river restoration is they do it in a way that they don't, in 10 years, you don't want to see that we've been there and engineered a project. You know, it's supposed to be natural, where you implement things like BDAs, which are beaver dam analogs. You know, the beaver have gone away, and so we have to make our own dams, but it's made out of natural material like wood that'll eventually wash away. And so as the winter rains come through and wash the sediment down and the wood structures, all these different analogs and floodplains will arise, so it creates perfect salmon habitat. And what we're also finding in these cold water tributaries that are feeding into the Klamath, that are super unique to the Klamath just because of the volcanic geology that is creating these subsurface tributaries that are, the water's super cold, it's coming out, and it's the perfect temperature for salmon to go and hide out and be able to spawn. Is the cold water they need. And so we're able to, as we're doing in-channel excavation, create these alcoves that are larger and make better habitat. So I'd say the project's going excellent all along the different watersheds.
All right, Kels.
Could before Kelsey jumps in, could I add something real quick?
Yes.
Yeah. So really quick with that one, right? This restoration work has been so exciting, and I think not only, right, for me, it hasn't only been the fact that restoration is being done, it's the connection of it being done by tribal members who live along the Klamath, because you get the opportunity to be paid to have these reconnections, for example, with the veg crew, to have these connections to these native plant species that we have been forced to be removed from for so long. And for me, you get a better quality of work to have someone who really cares about the work they're doing with collecting the seeds and planting and the success of the project, knowing that they get to contribute to the future of their great grandkids and be able to have something they show off. In addition to, right, reconnecting this traditional ecological knowledge, like reconnecting with people and seeing how natives can be like, oh, this is when this plant's blooming more, and this is when this plant is producing more seeds, or maybe it produces seeds only every other year. And all these things that don't have a lot of literature on for specific native plants. And that fact that we finally have the opportunity, since we've been forced, right, in a capitalistic world where we have to work full time to survive, that we're bringing these opportunities for that reconnection is really exciting for me. But also the fact that one of the things I'm doing my PhD, and you can hear me getting excited about this, because one of the questions I want to put forward when it comes to restoration work is, like, not only how are we meeting these goals, because when it comes to restoration, a lot of these projects and a lot of the concepts around restoration theory is really unexact, because people want to get back to a previous state. My cat's trying to break into my room. Back to a previous state of how things were and what does it look like pre-colonization. But because there is not, strict records of exact flows of exact sediment, like fluctuations, etc., there's not really an exact way to get there. And right, it costs time and money. And for me, that's one of the big reasons we need land back, is because, right, you can fund a project for 10 years, but really the landscape needs constant monitoring and constant interaction with Indigenous folks. And a lot of us do that work inherently because there's that mutual understanding. Like, we take care of these plants, then we get basket materials for from roots for our ceremonies, for our needs, um, and just that we have a mutual beneficial relationship with each other. And a lot of projects don't account for that, and again, are creating these ideas of when is restoration good enough, and is getting to a past state, like in the 60s, the goal. And in my mind, and kind of my ambition doing restoration theory and like looking at how we integrate Indigenous knowledge, is I don't see why we have to limit ourselves to past standards. Why can we not shoot for even better restoration goals, because we now have this technology, we now have this Indigenous leadership. We don't need to limit ourselves to these past standards, especially when the world has changed so much. I feel like we need to be flexible with how everything has changed, and look forward to an even brighter future versus just trying to meet the bare minimum of a past standard. And so those are some of the things I study in my PhD, and asking these questions of what goals do we want for restoration, and understanding that just because the dams came out on the Klamath River does not mean the work is done by any means. And it's not only going to require restoration, but better legislation when it comes to water, where the water is going, because a lot of it gets piped out to other areas in California when our wildlife still needs minimum flows, especially salmon and lamprey, to be able to meet their goals to, reproduce. And I just want to bring that intersectionality in there, that, right, we have made such great strides, especially considering how removed we have been in the past historically when it comes to restoration work. But I also want to make sure that, kind of how learning from like how those who were adults at the time with the dam removal were called foolish for like asking for 4 dams to be removed on the Klamath. I want to make sure I am almost a little bit foolish in my goals as well. We should be asking for more and trying to dream big, and seeing how we get there through our methods. And if we don't get there, we'll find ourselves in a better place regardless, versus stifling our ideas and our growth from the start.
I do want to hop in here. I apologize, but Brooke brought up something, and with all her passion, it sparked something that I'm also very passionate about when it comes to Indigenous-led restoration. And that's what you get with Indigenous-led restoration is not only place-based knowledge, the traditional ecological knowledge about, the inherent relationship that we have, but it's that relationship that adds a component to the restoration that you just can't get in Western approaches. And actually, there's recently a study done where someone from Southern Oregon University came, and they did a study with our revegetation crews, because we collect a lot of data when we're planting and we're throwing seed, and we have GIS points of where we did everything, and it makes it a lot easier for us to conduct studies. And so this Southern Oregon University student came down, and he's looking at the points of where acorn seeds were planted and trying to decide like what factors led to the best gestation of those acorn seeds. And one thing that Western approaches don't account for is that relationship approach between the natives from that land and when they're doing restoration, which includes their prayers and their intentions and their songs. And so one thing that stood out to me in the data that I looked at was there was one person who had the highest gestation rates, and it was way more like the gap between the next person was so much larger. I'd love to say her name, but I haven't asked her for her permission. But what I will say is that she is known to sing when she plants.
Hmm.
And that song, while she's planting those acorn seeds, it has made a measurable data impact. But the thing is, how do you quantify someone's song and the impact on it? And therefore, there aren't any studies on that. So
Or
while
should
it is,
we even quantify that, right? Like,
yeah,
should even Western science be the one to do that?
that's true.
To 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 jump way back to something you said, Dylan, about Fanon's black skin, white masks. that those seeking sovereignty cannot find that sovereignty within the systems that have oppressed them. They must step outside of those systems and push forward to the living relationships with the land and the environment that you and Brooke have been speaking to. That's where the healing happens. The war is happening in the governmental relationships, in negotiating that space between this natural system and this capitalist system. That's where the tug is taking place. But the real healing is happening within the living relationships with the land and the environment. And Kelsey, I just want to give it to you because I know we're nearing our time, and we have some closeout questions or.
Yeah. Definitely wish we would just go on for hours. There's so much more I want to ask and want to continue to even just follow up everything more even recently that's been said. But grounding in the systems of time constructs that we're working within today too. I really hear, Dylan, in what you just said of the significance of intention and then conveying that through spirit and expression and creativity and relation. I want to pose this to both of you, but really, if you could speak to what is your main driving intention for your work and how you're showing up to express yourself and relate with the world, and how we as an audience, everyone that's watching or listening, how they can engage deeper with that work, where they can go. Are there any particular ways that they can offer support? And again, I want to ask that for both of you, Dylan, with your podcast and new fellowship, and Brooke, with your website, educational resources. And as part of your answering, if you could even just speak a little bit to why you chose to focus on a children's book as one of your creations more recently.
Yeah, one of the reasons I did a children's book is I actually have had a dream to write a children's book since I was a child. So I have all these, I don't even know if I have one of them with me, but I have these really old school from when I was a kid writings of how I would do this book. So I have this paper copy that I used to make and print out about salmon that I physically made in elementary school and would try to get in like little libraries and stuff. And so this has been like a long time dream of mine to write a children's book about this. And when the dams were actually being taken down, it just seemed like a good time to actually put that forward. And I was fortunate to get a small grant from the Youth Arts Council in California, and so called Youth Speaks. And their funding was able to give me enough money to pay artist Anastasia, who is a Ukrainian woman who lives in Ukraine currently, what she deserves to be paid for her art, because often art is underpaid. And really and also having the business background, I took multiple business classes at Stanford, where to have a book published, you usually need to have a literary agent. And there's also, it's a topic for another day, a lot of issues in the publishing world where you have to have connections that are often systematically, taken away from like people of color who haven't had those connections to publish historically. And so I kind of pretended to be my own literary agent and was able to sell my book to a local publisher in California called Heyday. And so for me, it's treating the young Brooke with respect and treating her with kindness to know that I could make her dream come true. In addition to being able to speak to the general public, because if you can speak to 8-year-olds, you can speak to everyone. For me, children's books aren't just for children. It's just like a very simplified introduction to a topic. I read children's books about topics I have no idea about, and then I go in deep and then read the academic, PhD level research. But children's books for me are for everyone. And I'm also hoping to, think about that multi-generational idea that I hope by the time I retire, I was able to inspire someone to go into my field through my book to then be able to take over my job by that point. So it's about inspiring the next generation of engineers, academics, activists. And one of the best things that has ever been said to me after a book reading, where I've also had the privilege to read my book to over 1,000 children in the state of California and Oregon, who come from, mainly schools that have a high poverty level, in addition to like mainly schools of color, and be able to have them like meet an author and answer questions, and being able to have these conversations where a group of kids, after reading my book, their teacher emailed me and said that afterwards, when they went back to the classroom, they all wanted to brainstorm ideas that they could protect things they care about, because I was 7 years old when I started doing the protests and like started trying to like write these books and think about solutions. And so it inspired them to start having these conversations that despite being 7 years old, what can they do to contribute to what they love? And that is the biggest compliment and reward I've ever gotten in my life, is just giving that kind of authority or like that action and belief in youth. And to answer your other question, right, you can support through, right, sharing articles, sharing Dylan's podcast and the work he does about the work being done in the tribes. I would also say you can be supportive of this type of work through, one, creating relationships with place. So I always say the first step to reconnecting and creating your own local knowledge is, having a house plant, having a plant outside in a park you visit, and seeing how it changes over the years, seeing when it flourishes and when it's doing well, and maybe even like talking or singing to it and having a relationship with a specific plant and seeing how well it does in different areas and different times of the year. And that's like just the first step into creating a real connection with the area or a plant relative. And you can support me through, checking out my website, brookmthompson.com, BROOKMTHOMPSON.com. I have a children's education company called Thompson Teachings LLC, where I sell stuffed salmon and lamprey. I sell a Go Fish card game that I did all the drawings for of local Pacific Northwest sea and river creatures, and they all have fun facts about them in each card. I'm also producing new education games around river life, and you can buy my book pretty much anywhere books are sold. I Love Salmon and Lampreys. And I would encourage you to go to your local bookstore, if you have an independent bookstore, and ask them to order it for you, because that way you also support these independent bookstores as well. And yeah, the final thing I'd like to say before I pass it over to Dylan is that for me, and kind of what inspires my work, is this idea that because I've seen this with other people, is that my contributions, I hope, ripple out, kind of, when you have a drop in a pool and you see the ripples go out far, that when you're at the perspective of the dot, you'll see those ripples right around you, but maybe not the ones that reach far and wide. And that I hope my work can continue to inspire and make some change, however small, in people's life positively, whether that be, through this book, through my engineering, through my academic essays, and knowing that I will never always see the reach of my work. But as long as I'm putting good energy, my good, spirit and heart into things, hoping and knowing that it will reach the right people, and that can continue to perpetuate, this idea of healing and restoration and sustainability long term. And with that, I just want to say that it's not always, because I think it's really a privilege to be on a podcast like this and to be able to have this voice, but also knowing that, you don't always have to like be the Instagram person with like a million followers. You don't always have to be the person that's has the picture in the paper from being on the front lines of activist work. A lot of, I think, what takes the structural, like, again, engineering perspective, the structural foundation of really bringing everyone up is also like how people are treating their home lives. Like, if, as a parent or as like a relative, you're working on being healthier for yourself so you can support your kids, your cousins, and the other people, or even just yourself, that work is equally as important. And it's not always publicized or seen, and that it really takes a community to make a difference. And I have the privilege to have my, face and publicity in different places, but that doesn't mean my work is any more important than anyone else who is focusing on raising a healthy family at home, who is who is focused on supporting their kids and creating a healthy home life and healing themselves. And so to just give out a shout out to all those people, and that no one's illegal on stolen land. We're, should combine our power as stolen people on stolen land to make this a place that everyone can thrive and be happy. So that's where I want to leave out. Clau, thank you.
Thank you. And again, limit words to just hold space for all of the powerful sharings you just put forth, and shift over to Dylan. I'll reiterate, if you want to share with us what your driving intention is behind your podcast and interviewing in stories of various forms, and where people can find out more and hear the incredible work that you are doing, and any other ways you encourage them to support you and the communities and people you're involved with.
I want to start by recognizing, Brooke said a lot of amazing things. One of the things that resonated with me is it's a community effort, and you don't have to be on a large stage to be able to make a difference. The first thing, that you should think of is, well, if I want to make a difference just within my family, the first thing I need to do is to make a difference within myself. And then you start large and making the scope a little bit bigger. Then you move to your family, and you can make a difference in your family. And if you want to keep going, that's how you start reaching to larger and larger communities. But it starts where you are. And so I think that's important. As far as what I'm doing with my podcast, if you do want to watch my podcast, I'm on YouTube where you can watch the videos, but you can listen to it anywhere you listen to podcasts. It's called Drum Circle News. And I talked about it a little bit earlier, where I interview Indigenous leaders, Native American elders, Native politicians, executive directors, and organizations that feed Native American and Indigenous movements. So really my commitment is the re-indigenization movement. And then here on Turtle Island is the reawakening of the indigenous giant, which extends outside of federally recognized nations, but it goes into state recognized nations. It goes into the Mexican communities who are native people. And I think that's very important to recognize. Through my relationship with the National Organization of Indigenous, the National Council of Indigenous Governments of Mexico, I've really been working to try to help revive those trade routes and revive those relationships with our southern tribes, so that we can start recognizing ourselves outside of this federally recognized by Congress system that really doesn't mean anything to us personally, outside of, the state government to government relationships that are necessary. But as far as who we are as Native people, it's about our own recognition of ourselves and coming together and restoring our ways of life. One thing that's important to me, there's something in Native communities where 20% of Native elders live in rural areas. And that's dangerous for multiple reasons. Our culture is slowly dying, and we need to connect with our elders and have these conversations. I want to be able to have conversations with elders on my podcast to keep that energy alive, keep that knowledge alive. But there's a lot of stuff that elders aren't willing to say on camera for great reasons. And so I want to inspire the youth to go and reach out to the elders and have those connections. But the other thing is 9 out of 10 elders 55 or older have a serious or chronic disease. And so we need to be checking on our elders and make sure that they're doing all right. Make sure that they have food and that they can go see the doctor, or they have a ride to go see the doctor. You know, a lot of elders living in these rural areas, they don't even have power or a phone. And so we need to be there for them, which kind of leads into like another issue in the community about the food thing. Is, 25% of Native American households, some communities as high as 40%, experience food insecurity. And that's because 60 to 70% of Native communities exist inside of a food desert. And so the only place that you can grab food is a quick market where you can process foods. And that leads to 76% of natives being overweight and 21% of natives having diabetes. And we don't have as easy access to traditional food sources as we used to. That's why river restoration work, indigenous-led restoration, and land back initiatives are so important, so we can restore those native food sources. But also being able to revive those trade routes and those communal ties with each other, so that one nation's strengths can help another nation's weaknesses, and so on and so forth.
Thank
So
you.
check out Drum Circle News on YouTube.
More exciting, deeply fulfilling, extremely important knowledge to be shared by both of you over time. K2, I'll hand it over to you now.
Just want to say thank you for the time that you spent, for the gift of yourselves that you have given, about your lives and your work and your living relationships with yourselves, your people, your land, your ancestors. We need to hear more of this on a continuing basis. And I know that we will be hearing from you, Brook, as an educator and an author, and you, Dylan, as a communicator and an advocate and representative for your people's work and your lives. Thank you. Peace, respect, gratitude, and joy, and love.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We hope you found this conversation insightful and thought-provoking. Please like and follow the Proven Sustainable podcast to spread the word, and stay tuned for more engaging dialogues. Additional information and resources are available within the episode description and online at provensustainable.org.